Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Charleston, South Carolina. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. Nestled within the cobblestone streets and behind the grand facades of antebellum Charleston lies a tale that few historical texts dare to mention. In the year 1839, when the port city flourished with commerce and the dark undercurrents of human bondage, a merchant named Elias Thornwood established himself among the city's respectable business class. The Thornwood residence stood on Trad Street, a three-story brick home with white columns and wrought-iron balconies that spoke of new money and ambition. By all accounts, Elias was a successful importer of fine European goods, porcelain, silks, and furniture for Charleston's elite. His warehouse near the Cooper River employed 15 men and brought substantial revenue to the family coffers. What distinguishes this seemingly ordinary historical footnote from countless others is a peculiar notation found in 1868, tucked into the margin of a church register at St. Philip's Episcopal Church. Thornwood wife not deceased as recorded. Inquiries to cease by order of Judge Harrington. This single line, discovered during a routine archival assessment in 1966, would unravel a conspiracy of silence that had blanketed Charleston society for nearly a century. According to official records maintained by the city of Charleston, Adelaide Thornwood, born Adelaide Montgomery in Boston, Massachusetts, died of yellow fever on September 2, 1839. Her burial plot in the churchyard at St. Philip's contains a modest headstone, weathered by time and the salt air of the harbour. The stone reads simply, Adelaide Thornwood, beloved wife, 1817 to 1839. The death certificate, signed by Dr. James Wilkinson, confirms the cause as yellow fever, which was common enough in the swampy lowlands surrounding Charleston to avoid suspicion. What makes this case particularly strange is that no records exist of a yellow fever outbreak in Charleston during the late summer of 1839. In fact, city health records indicate it was an unusually healthy season, with cool breezes from the Atlantic keeping the mosquito population at bay. This discrepancy remained unnoticed for over a century until Margaret Hollings, a doctoral student researching epidemiological patterns in antebellum South Carolina, noticed the anomaly while cross-referencing burial records with public health documents. The Thornwood marriage had begun 5 years earlier when Elias, then 32 years old, traveled to Boston on business. He met Adelaide Montgomery, 22, at a social gathering hosted by her father, a prominent shipbuilder with connections throughout New England. The courtship was brief but intense, culminating in a winter wedding that merged northern industry with southern commerce. Acquaintances described Adelaide as educated and spirited, having attended a finishing school for young ladies in Philadelphia, where she developed an interest in literature and natural sciences. Letters exchanged between Adelaide and her childhood friend, Elizabeth Peabody of Concord, reveal a woman with progressive views on education, and most troublingly for her new southern home, reservations about the institution of slavery. The practice I now witness daily seems a stain upon the soul of this nation, she wrote in 1837, though I dare not express such thoughts beyond this correspondence. The young bride arrived in Charleston to a society that viewed her with both curiosity and suspicion. Northern wives were not uncommon among the merchant class, but Adelaide's refined manners and education set her apart in ways that created subtle friction. Household staff remembered her as kind, but somewhat distant, maintaining a politeness that never fully warmed into the familial relationships that often developed between southern mistresses and their enslaved domestics. According to house servant Millicent's later testimony to the Freedmen's Bureau in 1866, Adelaide insisted on teaching the cook's young daughter to read, despite South Carolina law explicitly forbidding literacy instruction to enslaved people. This detail, recorded matter-of-factly in a deposition concerning an entirely different matter, provides a glimpse into the tensions that must have existed within the Thornwood household. By 1838, cracks in the marriage became visible to those in Charleston society who paid attention to such things. Elias and Adelaide appeared less frequently together at social functions. When they did attend, witnesses noted strained interactions and conversations that died when others approached. Mary Pinckney, wife of attorney George Pinckney, and known in her private correspondence as a keen observer of Charleston's social dynamics, wrote to her sister in Virginia, "The Thornwood situation grows curious. He speaks for her at every turn, and she appears increasingly like a bird in a gilded cage, present but not permitted to sing." The Pinckney letters, discovered in a trunk in Albemarle County in 1958, provide one of the few contemporary accounts of the Thornwood marriage from someone within their social circle. Mary Pinckney further noted that Adelaide had developed a pallor and thinness that sparked rumors of consumption, though the young woman denied any illness when asked directly. What transformed this story from a merely unhappy marriage into something far more sinister was discovered in 1865, after Union forces occupied Charleston. Captain Frederick Bellows, assigned to review property records as part of Reconstruction efforts, uncovered a bill of sale dated August 27, 1839, 6 days before Adelaide's reported death. The document, hidden within a bundle of standard commercial transactions, recorded the sale of one mulatto woman, approximately 20 years of age, to James Bouvier, a known slave trader with connections to New Orleans and the Caribbean trade. The price was substantial, $1,800, well above the market rate for a domestic servant. What caught Captain Bellows' attention was not the transaction itself, which was sadly commonplace, but the physical description attached as an addendum: fair complexion with appearance of sunburn across nose and cheeks, literate, speaks well, claims Boston origin. The document was signed with Elias Thornwood's distinctive flourish. The peculiar description prompted Bellows to investigate further. Cross-referencing shipping records from Charleston Harbor, he discovered the merchant vessel Carolina Maid departed for New Orleans on August 29, 1839, with James Bouvier listed among the passengers. A cargo manifest included household goods and one servant. Most damning was a letter Bellows discovered among confiscated papers from Judge Harrington's office, the same judge mentioned in the church register notation. Dated October 12, 1839, it came from Elias Thornwood's business associate in New Orleans. "The matter has been concluded to your specifications. The package has been delivered to the Spanish gentleman as arranged. Your instructions regarding communication have been followed precisely. No further correspondence on this matter should be necessary." The letter was signed simply J.B., James Bouvier's initials. Captain Bellows' investigation stalled when more pressing Reconstruction matters demanded his attention, but he filed a report suggesting Adelaide Thornwood had not died of yellow fever, but had instead been sold into slavery, possibly transported beyond U.S. jurisdiction to avoid any chance of discovery or rescue. The report languished in military files until historian Dr. Gerald McKinney discovered it while researching a book on Reconstruction in Charleston in 1963. Even then, the implications seemed so outlandish that McKinney initially dismissed it as a Union officer's misunderstanding of Southern customs and documents. Only when he connected it with Margaret Holling's epidemiological research and the church register notation did the horrific possibility take shape. The silence surrounding Adelaide's fate extended beyond official records. Household staff who might have witnessed events leading to her disappearance were dispersed after her supposed death. Elias Thornwood sold his Charleston property in 1840 and relocated to Savannah, Georgia, where he remarried and established a new import business. He died in 1852 of heart failure, his secret apparently secure. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not just the act itself, though the concept of a husband selling his wife into slavery represents a moral nadir even in a time of institutionalized human bondage, but the community conspiracy required to maintain the deception. Dr. Wilkinson, who signed the false death certificate, continued practicing medicine in Charleston until 1858. Judge Harrington, who apparently ordered inquiries to cease, presided over the Charleston court until 1871. These were not marginal figures, but respected professionals who chose to participate in covering up what can only be described as murder by another name. The question that haunts researchers is why Adelaide Thornwood was targeted for such a fate. Snippets of evidence suggest an answer both mundane and chilling in its implications. In April 1839, Elias Thornwood's business suffered a significant setback when a shipment of goods from France was lost in a storm off the coast of North Carolina. Insurance covered only a portion of the loss. Simultaneously, property records show Adelaide inherited a substantial sum from her maternal grandfather's estate in Massachusetts. Under the law at that time, a husband had legal control over his wife's property and inheritances. A letter from Elias to his lawyer in Boston, dated May 1839, inquires about obstacles to accessing the Montgomery trust funds and expresses frustration about unnecessary delays caused by family interference. Adelaide's brother, William Montgomery, apparently traveled to Charleston in July of the same year, though no record exists of what transpired during his visit. He returned to Boston by early August, based on his signature on a business document that dated August 12th. What gives this historical account its most disturbing dimension is the discovery made in 1965 by construction workers renovating the old Thornwood house on Tradd Street. Behind a sealed section of wall in the cellar, they found a small leather-bound book. Water damage had rendered many pages illegible, but those that could be read contained what appeared to be Adelaide's private diary. The entries stop abruptly in mid-August 1839. The final readable passage states, "E has become something I no longer recognize. The rage in his eyes when denied cannot be described. He speaks of debts and obligations, then in the same breath of opportunities in the islands. I have written to William, but fear the letter may not have been sent. Last night the key was removed from my door. Mary P. has promised to call tomorrow, which provides some comfort." The diary was transferred to the Charleston Historical Society, where it remained largely forgotten in archival storage until Dr. McKinney's research brought the case back to light. Mary Pinckney's promised visit apparently never took place, or if it did, it failed to prevent what followed. Her letters from September 1839 express shock at Adelaide's sudden death and mention sending flowers to the funeral, which she did not personally attend due to what she described as a sudden indisposition. By October, her letters make no mention of Adelaide or the Thornwoods at all, a conspicuous absence given her previous interest in the couple. When the Thornwood case was reopened by historian Dr. McKinney in 1965, no living descendants of the principal figures could be located for comment. The Thornwood line had ended with Elias's son from his second marriage, who died childless in 1921. The Montgomery family of Boston had moved west during the early 1900s, their connections to Adelaide apparently severed long before. The fate of Adelaide Thornwood after her sale remains unknown. Slave records from New Orleans show no entry matching her description, suggesting James Bouvier followed through on the plan to transport her beyond U.S. jurisdiction, possibly to Cuba or another Caribbean location where her fair complexion and education might have placed her in domestic service rather than field labor. The reference to a Spanish gentleman in the letter discovered by Captain Bellows suggests a prearranged buyer, perhaps someone who would value her education and refinement as attributes for a household servant or companion. The thought that Adelaide, raised in freedom and privilege in Boston, educated and once connected to the highest levels of society, might have lived out her days in bondage, her very identity erased, represents a particularly American horror. That such a fate could be orchestrated not by strangers, but by her husband, with the complicity of respected community leaders, speaks to the moral bankruptcy that the institution of slavery fostered even among those considered pillars of society. In 1968, a small ceremony was held at St. Philip's Churchyard. The weathered headstone claiming to mark Adelaide Thornwood's final resting place was amended with a small bronze plaque. It reads simply, Adelaide Montgomery Thornwood, 1817 to unknown. Let truth prevail. The grave beneath, exhumed during the renewed investigation, contained only a few personal items. A hairbrush, a pair of gloves, books, but no human remains. These objects, carefully preserved and sealed in a wooden box, now rest in the collection of the Charleston Historical Society, silent witnesses to a crime that history nearly forgot. Visitors to the archive sometimes report an oppressive feeling in the storage room where the box is kept, though this may simply be the natural human response to confronting such calculated cruelty from our shared past. The story of Adelaide Thornwood represents more than just an isolated act of evil. It demonstrates how systems of oppression corrupt not only their direct participants, but also those who benefit indirectly. The doctors who sign false certificates, the judges who order silence, the friends who choose not to ask difficult questions. In a society built upon human bondage, even a woman of privilege could be reduced to property once certain protections were stripped away. The thin line between freedom and enslavement proved more permeable than comfortable historical narratives might suggest. One wonders how many similar cases might lie undiscovered in archives across the nation, their victims lost not only to freedom, but to memory itself. Today, the Thornwood House still stands on Trad Street, though it has passed through many owners since 1840. Current residents report no particular disturbances or unusual occurrences, perhaps because Adelaide's spirit never resided there at all, but was transported far from Charleston to suffer an unknown fate. The warehouse near the Cooper River was demolished in 1932 to make way for more modern facilities. Judge Harrington's courthouse still serves the city, though few who walk its corridors know the role it played in sanctioning such a profound injustice. St. Philip's Church continues as an active Episcopal parish, its cemetery a popular stop on historical tours of Charleston, though guides rarely mention the story of the empty grave, with its quiet accusation etched in bronze. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Adelaide Thornwood's story is how easily it was erased, how thoroughly the conspiracy of silence succeeded for more than a century. Had it not been for the chance discovery of that marginal note, the discrepancy in yellow fever records, and Captain Bellows's forgotten report, her true fate might never have come to light. This case reminds us that history is not simply what happened, but what was recorded, and what was deliberately unrecorded. It raises uncomfortable questions about how many other truths remain buried, not beneath cemetery soil, but under layers of document destruction, misdirection, and collective agreement to look away from unpalatable realities. In the years since Dr. McKinney's research brought the case to scholarly attention, several attempts have been made to trace Adelaide's path after leaving Charleston Harbor. Researchers have combed through port records in New Orleans, Havana, and Santo Domingo, searching for any trace of a woman matching her description, arriving in September 1839. A few tantalizing possibilities have emerged. A notation in the household accounts of a Spanish merchant in Havana mentions acquiring a new English-speaking house manager in October of that year. A letter from a French plantation owner near Port-au-Prince to his brother in Paris makes reference to purchasing a remarkably educated mulatto woman who claims American birth from a Spanish dealer in late 1839. But no definitive evidence has been found to confirm Adelaide's ultimate destination or fate. Like so many victims of human trafficking throughout history, she disappeared into a system designed to erase individual identities and render people as interchangeable commodities. For those who know where to look, echoes of Adelaide Thornwood's story can still be found in Charleston. The false narrative of her death from yellow fever appears in several 19th-century genealogical records of prominent Charleston families, repeated without question. Her name is listed among the yellow fever victims commemorated on a small plaque in the Charleston Museum, an ironic memorial to a woman who did not die but was instead condemned to a living death far from home. The sealed wall section in the cellar where her diary was discovered has been preserved by the current owners of the Trad Street house as a somber reminder, though few visitors understand its true significance. Perhaps most poignantly, records at Boston's Mount Auburn Cemetery show that Adelaide's mother, Sarah Montgomery, purchased a memorial stone there in 1845, inscribed, "In memory of Adelaide, lost to us but not forgotten." Whether Sarah Montgomery ever learned the true fate of her daughter remains unknown. As modern Charleston continues to reckon with its complex history and the central role of slavery in building its wealth and shaping its society, stories like Adelaide's challenge simplistic narratives. She exists in a liminal space between the experience of the enslaver and the enslaved, a free woman condemned to bondage through a perversion of both law and personal trust. Her story reminds us that the moral corruption of slavery extended far beyond the auction block and plantation field, seeping into intimate relationships and corrupting the very institutions meant to provide justice and truth. That such a fate could befall a woman of Adelaide's status and connections raises uncomfortable questions about how many others, with fewer protections and resources, might have suffered similar fates without leaving even the fragmentary evidence that allows us to piece together her story. In 1969, Dr. McKinney published his full account of the case in the Journal of Southern History, bringing academic attention to this unusual instance of a free woman being sold into slavery by her husband. The article prompted a brief flurry of interest, including a mention in the New York Times and several regional newspapers. Public fascination with the case quickly faded, however, perhaps because it defied easy categorization or comfortable resolution. It was neither a ghost story with supernatural elements, nor a murder mystery with a clear conclusion. Instead, it represented something perhaps more disturbing, a true crime without justice, a disappearance without resolution, and a conspiracy successful enough to nearly erase a woman from history entirely. For those who study the darker chapters of American history, Adelaide Thornwood's story serves as a reminder of how fragile freedom could be, even for those who seemed secure in their social position. It demonstrates the incredible power that systems of oppression grant to those positioned to exploit them, and how institutions can be corrupted to serve private venality rather than public good. Most of all, it stands as a testament to the countless untold stories that lie buried beneath the cobblestones and behind the grand facades of cities built on hidden suffering. Adelaide Montgomery Thornwood entered the historical record twice, first through the conventional narrative of her false death, and later through the fragmentary evidence of her true fate. Between those two entries lies a void that can never be fully filled, a life interrupted and then erased by those who valued profit over humanity. Today, as tourists stroll through Charleston's historic district, admiring the preserved architecture and beautiful gardens, few realize they walk in the footsteps of such intimate betrayal. The Thornwood house appears on no ghost tours or lists of infamous locations. It has been fully renovated, its dark history known only to serious students of local law. The only visible acknowledgement of Adelaide's story remains that small bronze plaque in St. Philip's churchyard, "Let Truth Prevail," a quiet challenge to a conspiracy of silence that nearly succeeded in erasing her completely from the historical record. For those who know where to look, it serves as a somber reminder that beneath the veneer of Southern gentility and romantic antebellum narratives lie countless stories of cruelty and betrayal that history has too often conspired to forget. The weight of Adelaide's absence continues to be felt in subtle ways throughout Charleston's historical landscape. During the preservation efforts of the 1970s, Architects restoring homes on Trad Street reported an unusual phenomenon in the former Thornwood residence. Workers refused to remain alone in the cellar where the diary had been discovered, describing an oppressive atmosphere and sudden drops in temperature. Professional skeptics attribute these experiences to the power of suggestion after learning the home's history, yet the discomfort persisted even among those who had not been told the story. The current owners, who purchased the property in 2004, have reported no unusual occurrences, though they admit to feeling a certain solemnity in the space where the hidden diary was recovered. In 1972, a collection of letters was discovered during the renovation of a former shipping office near Charleston Harbor. Among these was correspondence between Elias Thornwood and various business associates dating from 1838 to 1839. Most concerned routine matters of commerce, but several contained veiled references to the Boston situation and domestic arrangements requiring adjustment. Most telling was a letter dated July 23, 1839, in which Thornwood wrote to James Bouvier, "The legal entanglements regarding the northern property prove more stubborn than anticipated. Family interference has complicated access to necessary funds. Alternative arrangements may provide a more expedient solution to both matters simultaneously." The carefully coded language suggests Elias had been planning Adelaide's disappearance for weeks, possibly prompted by her family's efforts to protect her inheritance from his control. William Montgomery, Adelaide's brother, appears to have suspected something amiss during his visit to Charleston in July 1839. Upon his return to Boston, he consulted with the family attorney regarding options for securing his sister's inheritance against her husband's claims. A letter from the attorney, dated August 18th, suggests establishing a separate trust to ensure Mrs. Thornwood's financial security, independent of her husband's business ventures. The letter also mentions William's concerns about his sister's increasingly isolated circumstances and restrictions placed upon her correspondence. William apparently planned a return visit to Charleston in September, a trip rendered moot by news of Adelaide's supposed death from yellow fever. His personal diary, preserved by Montgomery descendants and discovered by a genealogist in 1977, contains a single cryptic entry from October 1839. A situation more troubling than initially feared. Charleston authorities dismissive, Judge H particularly unhelpful. Must pursue other channels. No record exists of what actions William might have taken subsequently, though Boston newspaper archives contain no public accusations or legal proceedings against Elias Thornwood. The complicity of Charleston's professional class in covering up Adelaide's fate reveals much about the social dynamics of the era. Dr. James Wilkinson, who falsified her death certificate, was not merely a physician but also served on the board of directors for the Charleston Mercantile Bank, where Elias Thornwood conducted business. Judge Harrington, who ordered inquiries to cease, had extensive investments in shipping ventures that utilized Thornwood's import connections. These were not anonymous bureaucrats, but men whose financial interests aligned with maintaining Elias Thornwood's position and reputation. Their willingness to participate in effectively erasing a woman from existence, condemning her to an unimaginable fate, speaks to how completely the institution of slavery had corrupted moral reasoning among even the respectable classes. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this historical investigation is a document discovered in 1979 in the archives of a New Orleans notary. Among papers related to property transactions was a bill of sale dated October 12, 1839, recording the transfer of one female domestic servant, fair complexion, approximately 25 years of age, from a Spanish merchant named Carlos Vega to a French planter with holdings outside Port-au-Prince. The woman is identified only as Elena, but a marginal note describes her as educated, suitable for household management, English-speaking with some French. The timing and description align with what is known of Adelaide's sale and transport. If this was indeed Adelaide Thornwood, renamed and sold yet again, her path led to Saint-Domingue, where she would have found herself in a French-speaking society far removed from anything familiar. The price paid, $2,400, represented a significant markup from her initial sale in Charleston, suggesting her education and refinement were considered valuable commodities in the Caribbean slave market. The trail grows cold after this transaction. No further records have been found that might indicate Adelaide's ultimate fate. Did she live out her years on a French plantation in Haiti, perhaps eventually earning a measure of autonomy through her skills and education? Did she attempt escape, possibly seeking passage to a British colony where slavery had been abolished in 1833? Did she succumb to tropical disease or hardship in a land entirely foreign to her? These questions remain unanswered, though researchers continue to examine Caribbean archives for any trace of a woman matching her description. The very completeness of her disappearance underscores the terrifying efficiency of the slave system in obliterating individual identities and severing all connections to previous lives. In 1983, a curious footnote to the case emerged when restoration work on St. Philip's Church uncovered a hidden space beneath the floor near the altar. Inside was a small tin box containing personal items, a cameo brooch, a pair of reading glasses, several letters addressed to Adelaide from her mother in Boston, and a miniature portrait of a young woman with auburn hair. A note accompanying these effects, written in a shaky hand on church stationery, read, "These belong to Mrs. T. They should not have been buried with empty coffin as husband directed. I keep them safe until truth may be told." Thomas Jennings, sexton. The church records confirmed that Thomas Jennings had served as sexton at St. Philip's from 1829 until his death in 1857. This discovery suggests that at least one person with direct knowledge of the deception had harbored doubts about his role, preserving these small pieces of Adelaide's life against the day when her true story might be known. The items were carefully catalogued and added to the Adelaide Thornwood collection at the Charleston Historical Society. The portrait in particular provides a poignant connection to a woman previously known only through written descriptions. The face that gazes out from the miniature shows a young woman with intelligent eyes and a composed expression, her hair styled in the fashion of the 1830s, a small smile suggesting a reserved optimism about life. That this image survived when so much else was deliberately destroyed seems a small triumph against the conspiracy that sought to erase her completely. Visitors to the Historical Society can now look upon the face of Adelaide Montgomery Thornwood and contemplate the extraordinary brutality that could transform a free woman of good family into human property, trafficked across borders at her husband's command. Historians have debated the uniqueness of Adelaide's case. Was this an isolated incident of particular depravity, or does it represent a pattern of abuse hidden within the larger evil of the slave system? Records from the antebellum period suggest that while the sale of free persons into slavery was not common, neither was it unprecedented. Most documented cases involved free people of color who were kidnapped or fraudulently enslaved, crimes made possible by a system that presumed black Americans to be slaves unless they could prove otherwise. Adelaide's case is unusual in that she was white, educated, and connected to prominent northern families, advantages that should have protected her, but ultimately did not. That her husband could orchestrate such a fate for her, with the complicity of Charleston's professional class, demonstrates the absolute power that slaveholding societies granted to white men over those legally subordinate to them, including, in many respects, their wives. The legal status of women in antebellum America made Adelaide particularly vulnerable to her husband's machinations. Under the doctrine of coverture, a married woman's legal identity was subsumed into her husband's. She could not own property separately, sign contracts, or file lawsuits independently. Her inheritance legally became her husband's to control upon marriage. While social customs and family connections provided some practical protections, a woman isolated from her family and friends, as Adelaide increasingly became in the months before her disappearance, had few formal recourses against a husband determined to control her. That Elias Thornwood took this control to its most extreme conclusion by literally selling his wife reflects not just individual depravity, but the logical extension of a legal system that treated women as subordinate beings and human beings as potential property. A further dimension to Adelaide's vulnerability emerged in 1986, when a genealogist researching the Montgomery family discovered that Adelaide's maternal grandmother had been French Creole from Louisiana. Though this heritage was apparently distant enough that Adelaide was fully accepted as white in Boston society, it provided a technical opening for Elias to classify her as having mixed ancestry, a mulatto in the racial terminology of the time, in the bill of sale. In a society obsessed with racial categorization and the enforcement of the slave system, even the rumor of non-white ancestry could place a person in jeopardy. Whether Elias actually believed this lineage mattered or simply used it as a legal technicality to facilitate the sale remains unclear. But it demonstrates how racial ideology could be weaponized even against those normally protected by white privilege, when other factors, in this case gender and marital status, made them vulnerable. The complicity of Charleston society in maintaining silence about Adelaide's fate extends beyond the direct participants. Mary Pinckney's sudden cessation of commentary on the Thornwoods in her correspondence suggests she may have learned something of the truth, but chose not to pursue it. Church records show that Adelaide's funeral service was sparsely attended, with most of Elias Thornwood's business associates sending their wives rather than appearing personally, perhaps to avoid direct participation in the deception. Newspaper accounts of her death were brief and formulaic, without the extended obituaries often accorded to women of her social standing. These small abnormalities, unremarkable in isolation, form a pattern of avoidance and discomfort when viewed collectively. Charleston society, it seems, sensed something amiss in the Thornwood household, but collectively chose to look away, a community conspiracy of silence that protected Elias and abandoned Adelaide to her fate. In 1990, historian Dr. Rebecca Harrington, no relation to the judge, published a comprehensive analysis of the Thornwood case, placing it within the broader context of women's vulnerability in antebellum society. She argued that while Adelaide's fate was extreme, the legal and social structures that made it possible affected all women to varying degrees. The absolute control granted to husbands over wives' property, mobility, and legal standing created conditions where abuse could flourish behind closed doors, she wrote. That Adelaide Thornwood's abuse took the specific form it did reflects the particular institution of slavery that characterized her time and place, but the fundamental dynamics of power and control have manifested in different ways across history. Dr. Harrington's analysis helped shift understanding of the case from a singular historical curiosity to a revealing window into intersecting systems of oppression based on gender, race, and economic control. The physical spaces associated with Adelaide's story have transformed over the nearly 2 centuries since her disappearance. The Thornwood house on Trad Street remains a private residence, its elegant facade giving no hint of the darkness in its history. The warehouse near the Cooper River where Elias conducted his import business was demolished in the 1930s to make way for more modern facilities. The offices of Dr. Wilkinson and Judge Harrington have been repurposed many times over, currently housing a restaurant and law firm, respectively. St. Philip's Church continues as an active parish, though the empty grave with its accusatory bronze plaque stands as a quiet rebuke to the institution's past complicity. These physical transformations mirror the way in which history itself has attempted to move beyond the moral bankruptcies of the past, sometimes through genuine reckoning, sometimes through convenient forgetting. In 2007, a final piece of the Adelaide Thornwood puzzle emerged during digitization of the archives of a Havana trading company. Among thousands of routine business documents was a letter dated November 1839 from Carlos Vega, the Spanish merchant identified in the New Orleans sale record, to a business associate. The letter mostly concerned tobacco shipments, but a postscript mentioned the American woman continues to insist upon her free status and Boston origins. She grows troublesome despite correction. If current sale to French islands falls through, may need to place her further from American territories, perhaps Santo Domingo interior, or even Brazil. Will advise. This brief, chilling note provides the last known reference to a woman who may have been Adelaide. Its matter-of-fact tone regarding correction and the potential for further sale deeper into slave territories offers a glimpse of the horror she faced. A free woman insisting upon a truth that her captors were determined to erase, facing punishment for maintaining her actual identity. Whether Adelaide Thornwood ever found any measure of justice or freedom remains unknown. If the woman mentioned in Carlos Vega's letter was indeed Adelaide, she apparently maintained her sense of self despite efforts to break her spirit, a small but significant resistance against the system that sought to erase her. The reference to potential sale to the French islands aligns with the bill of sale discovered in New Orleans records, suggesting she may indeed have been transported to Haiti. French colonists there maintained slavery even after the Haitian Revolution had officially abolished it in much of the territory, creating isolated pockets where human bondage continued. If Adelaide was sold to such a plantation, her fate would have been precarious, as slave and free territories existed in uneasy proximity, with the ever-present possibility of slave uprisings and changing jurisdictions. In the broader historical context, Adelaide Thornwood disappeared at a pivotal moment in American history. The year 1839 saw growing tensions between abolitionists and defenders of slavery. The Amistad case, involving enslaved Africans who seized control of the ship transporting them and landed in the United States, began that same year. Northern opposition to slavery was becoming more organized and vocal, while Southern states increasingly viewed themselves as under siege. Adelaide, with her Boston background and reported reservations about slavery, embodied this national division within her own household. That her husband could so thoroughly silence her, not just figuratively but literally removing her from society and erasing her identity, represents in microcosm the efforts of slaveholding interests to control the national narrative and suppress dissenting voices. Modern Charleston has begun to reckon more honestly with its complicated past, including the central role of slavery in building the city's wealth and shaping its society. Historical markers now acknowledge slave markets and auction houses that were once deliberately omitted from tourist narratives. Museums include exhibits on the lives and contributions of enslaved people alongside those of the city's elite. Within this broader context of historical reassessment, Adelaide Thornwood's story has gained new relevance as an example of how the institution of slavery corrupted even the most intimate human relationships. A small exhibit at the Charleston Museum now includes her story, featuring reproductions of the documents that revealed her fate and the miniature portrait that preserved her image. The exhibit text notes that while her case was unusual in some respects, the systems of power that enabled it affected countless others whose stories remain untold. Visitors to Charleston today might walk past the Thornwood house on Trad Street without realizing its significance, or pause at Adelaide's empty grave in St. Philip's churchyard without fully comprehending the horror it represents. Yet for those who know the story, these physical spaces take on a profound emotional resonance. They become monuments not just to one woman's suffering, but to the larger moral catastrophe of a society that could rationalize human bondage and the treatment of people as property. The bronze plaque, with its simple demand, "Let truth prevail," speaks not just to Adelaide's specific case, but to the ongoing struggle to acknowledge historical truths that many would prefer to forget or minimize. The partial recovery of Adelaide Thornwood's story from historical obscurity represents both a success and a failure of historical memory. On one hand, the discovery of key documents and physical evidence has allowed us to piece together the broad outlines of what happened to her and to counter the false narrative of her death from yellow fever. On the other hand, the most important questions remain unanswered. What became of Adelaide after her sale to the French planter? Did she live a long life or a short one? Did she ever regain any measure of freedom or agency? Did she maintain hope of rescue or reconciliation with her Boston family? These questions seem likely to remain unanswered unless further documents emerge from the archives of Haiti or other Caribbean locations where she might have been taken. In the absence of these answers, Adelaide's story stands as a haunting reminder of how completely a human life could be erased by systems of power and oppression. A woman of education and social standing, with family connections and financial resources, could nonetheless be reduced to property through the intersection of gender subordination and the institution of slavery. Her identity could be officially eradicated through false documents and community silence. Her fate could be determined entirely by the financial interests of her husband and his business associates. This absolute vulnerability, the condition of having no effective rights or recourse, was the reality for millions of enslaved people throughout American history. Adelaide's case is remarkable not because her suffering was unique, but because her initial social position makes the mechanisms of her erasure more visible and documented than was typically the case. As night falls over Charleston, the streets of the historic district grow quiet. The grand homes with their piazzas and gardens take on a different character in the darkness. Beautiful still, but with shadows that seem deeper, more concealing. In these shadows, one might imagine Adelaide Thornwood on that August night in 1839, perhaps realizing too late the fate her husband had arranged for her. Did she have a final moment of clarity as she was taken from the house? Did she understand that the death certificate would already be prepared, the false narrative already constructed? Did she maintain hope that her brother William or friend Mary Pinckney would recognize the deception and search for her? These questions find no answers in the historical record. What remains instead is the silence that almost succeeded in erasing her completely, a silence broken only by fragments of evidence that survived through chance and the passage of time. For modern visitors to Charleston, walking the same streets Adelaide once walked, her story provides a sobering counterpoint to the romanticized narratives of antebellum gentility. Behind the gracious facades and beneath the cobblestones lies a history more complex and often more brutal than guided tours typically acknowledge. That a woman could be sold into slavery by her husband in 1839 America, with the complicity of community leaders and the silence of social peers, reminds us how thoroughly moral reasoning can be corrupted by systems that deny full humanity to any category of persons. The bronze plaque in St. Philip's Churchyard, "Let Truth Prevail," stands as both memorial and admonition, a quiet insistence that we confront history honestly, even when its truths disturb our preferred narratives about the past. Adelaide Montgomery Thornwood, born to privilege in Boston in 1817, vanished from recorded history in the late summer of 1839. The conspiracy to erase her succeeded for more than a century before fragments of evidence allowed her true story to emerge. Though many questions about her fate remain unanswered, the partial recovery of her narrative serves as a powerful reminder of how historical silences often conceal the experiences of those most vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. In breaking this particular silence, we honor not just Adelaide, but countless others whose stories remain untold, whose suffering was carefully hidden by those who benefited from systems of oppression, and whose humanity was denied by legal structures designed to protect property rather than persons. The empty grave in St. Philip's Churchyard may contain no physical remains, but it has become a repository for a different kind of historical memory, a place where truth, however partial and delayed, has finally prevailed over deliberate forgetting.